I hired a private investigator to follow my husband, and the person he was meeting was not who I expected. My name is Jennifer. I am 39 years old, I live in Austin, Texas, and 14 months ago I hired a private investigator because my husband had been leaving the house 3 evenings a week for 4 months, telling me he had a work project that required evening meetings, and because something about the explanation had never fully settled in the way explanations settle when they are true. The investigator followed my husband for 2 weeks. On the 14th day the investigator called me and said he had something I needed to see, and that it was not what I had been expecting. My husband's name is Richard. We had been married for 11 years. I had expected the investigator to tell me about a woman. I had been preparing myself for that specific information for 4 months of unexplained evenings. The person Richard had been meeting 3 evenings a week for 4 months was a therapist. A grief therapist. Richard had been attending grief therapy sessions for the death of his father, who had passed away 14 months earlier, and who Richard had told me he was fine about, because Richard had always told me he was fine about things that he was not fine about, and I had accepted the telling because I had not known how to push past it. He had not told me about the therapy because he had been ashamed of needing it, and because he had believed I would see the needing as weakness, and because he had been wrong about what I would see and had not trusted me enough to find out. I sat with the investigator's report for 2 days. Then I sat down with Richard, and I told him what I had found, and I asked him to tell me the rest. He told me everything: the grief, the therapy, the shame, the specific ways he had been carrying his father's death in private for 14 months, while performing fine in our marriage. We talked for 3 hours. Richard is still in therapy. We are in couples therapy together now in addition to his individual sessions. The investigator's fee was the best money I have spent in our marriage because it told me the thing I had been afraid of was not the thing that was happening, and because the thing that was actually happening was something we could address together rather than something that ended us. I think about the 4 months of unexplained evenings sometimes. I think about what it cost Richard to carry that alone, and what it cost me to not know, and what it would have cost both of us if I had not hired someone to follow him, and found out it was a grief therapist in a building on the east side of Austin 3 evenings a week. Update: 4 months later. Richard's therapist suggested last month that I attend one of his individual sessions, not as couples therapy, but as a way of understanding what he had been working through. I went. I sat in the room and I listened to my husband talk about his father in ways he had not talked to me in 14 months of marriage, and I understood things about who Richard was, and where he had come from that I had known partially, and now knew more completely. On the drive home, Richard said he was sorry he had not told me sooner. I told him I was glad he had told a therapist, even if he had not told me, because the telling to someone had been the beginning of the telling to me. He said he had not thought about it that way. I said I thought that was probably right, and that not thinking about it that way had been part of the problem, and that we were thinking about it differently now, and that differently now was what mattered. My coworker of 5 years turned out to be my half-sibling. We found out at a company DNA testing event. My name is Marcus. I am 34 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and 16 months ago my company organized a voluntary DNA ancestry event as a team-building exercise, and I and my coworker of 5 years discovered that we share a father. We had worked in the same department for 5 years, had eaten lunch together hundreds of times, had attended each other's work celebrations, had complained about the same meetings and the same deadlines and the same office coffee for 5 years, without knowing that the reason we had always felt an easy familiarity with each other that neither of us had fully examined was that we were half-siblings. The event was organized by our HR department with a DNA testing company that provided ancestry results and family connection data. Diana and I submitted our samples on the same Thursday afternoon, and received our results 3 weeks later by email. Diana received hers first and came to my desk and said there was something strange in her results and asked if I had looked at mine yet. I had not. I opened my results while she was standing at my desk. The match was significant and unambiguous. The testing company's algorithm classified us as half-siblings with a confidence level that left no meaningful room for alternative interpretation. We looked at each other across my desk. We had been looking at each other across desks and across lunch tables for 5 years. We sat in a conference room for 2 hours that afternoon working through what we knew about our respective families, and constructing a picture that resolved, by the end of the 2 hours, into the following. We shared a biological father who had been in both of our mothers' lives during overlapping periods approximately 35 years ago, and who had apparently not disclosed to either woman the existence of the other. Diana's mother knew about the overlap. Mine did not. Diana had known she had a half-sibling somewhere for years because her mother had told her when Diana was 20. She had not known the half-sibling worked 3 desks away. I called my mother that evening. The conversation was long and difficult and honest in the way that conversations are honest when the information requiring honesty has been held for 34 years, and has finally arrived. Diana and I have had dinner 8 times since the testing event. We are building something that is careful and real, and that neither of us had planned for, and that has emerged from 5 years of accidental proximity in the most specific possible way. Our coworkers find the story extraordinary. We have told it many times. Diana tells it better than I do. I think that is probably because she knew for longer that there was a story to tell. Update: 3 months later. Diana and I met our father last month. He is 63 years old and lives in a different state, and he knew about both of us, and had made the specific decision to not be present in either of our lives, which is its own complicated thing that neither Diana nor I has fully processed. The meeting was short and careful and produced more questions than answers, and we both drove home from it knowing more and understanding less than we had before. Diana called me that evening and said she was glad she had not known he was like that when she was growing up because knowing would have been worse than not knowing. I said I thought she was probably right. We had dinner 2 days later, and we talked about other things because other things were what we needed, and because Diana and I have learned that we are good at other things together, and that other things are sometimes the most important available conversation. My neighbor has been secretly maintaining my late mother's garden for 2 years. I had no idea until I saw him at 5 a.m. My name is Thomas. I am 44 years old. I live in Denver, Colorado, and 8 months ago I woke up at 5 in the morning because I could not sleep, and I looked out my kitchen window, and I saw my neighbor in my backyard tending my mother's garden in the dark with a headlamp. My mother had passed away 2 years earlier. She had maintained the garden for 30 years. It was the specific and beautiful result of 3 decades of attention. A garden that had been entirely her project, and that I had kept alive after her passing with a commitment that was more about honoring her than about any gardening knowledge of my own. I had believed I was maintaining it alone. I had not been maintaining it alone. My neighbor's name is Walter. He is 71 years old, and he had lived next door for 26 years, and had known my mother for all of those years in the specific close way of longtime neighbors who share a fence and a mutual understanding of what the other values. I went outside. Walter saw me coming and turned off the headlamp and stood up and said he could explain. He explained for 40 minutes standing in my mother's garden at 5 in the morning. He had been coming into my backyard 3 mornings a week, early before I woke, using a gate in the fence that I had not known was accessible from his side. And he had been doing the work that my mother's garden required, and that my commitment without knowledge had been insufficient to provide. He had been doing this for 2 years without telling me, because he had not wanted to make it a thing. He had not wanted to be thanked or acknowledged, or to have it become a conversation. He had just wanted the garden to be what it had been when my mother was in it, because the garden being what it had been was something he had needed as much as he had understood I needed it. My mother and Walter had been friends for 26 years. He had known her the way neighbors know each other. The history of small daily exchanges accumulated into something real over decades. He had been grieving her too in the specific quiet way of someone who is not a family member, and therefore does not receive the formal acknowledgments of grief, but feels the loss just as specifically. I sat with everything Walter told me, and I understood that the garden had been a shared project for 2 years without my knowing, and that it was better than what I had believed it to be, and that Walter had made it better in the mornings before I woke while I was sleeping and not knowing. We have had coffee every Sunday morning since. We tend the garden together now, not in the dark, not in secret, in the morning after coffee when the light is right, and the birds are doing whatever birds do in the early part of a day. Walter knows things about the garden that I did not know because my mother had told him over 26 years of shared fence and conversation. He tells me what he knows. I write it down. Between us we have something close to the complete record of what she made and how she made it, and I think that is one of the better things that has happened in the 2 years since she was gone. Update 4 months later. Walter brought me something last month that I had not known existed. A notebook my mother had given him years ago. A small one, her handwriting, notes about the garden. Which plants needed what, when to plant what, observations she had made over years about what worked and what did not. He said she had given it to him one afternoon saying he might want it someday, and that someday had arrived and he thought I should have it. I held the notebook for a long time. Then I sat at my kitchen table and I read every page. Then I went outside and I stood in the garden, and I thought about my mother writing in a small notebook and giving it to a neighbor, and about that neighbor keeping it for years and knowing when to return it. I thought that was one of the most specific acts of care I had ever witnessed, and that it had happened in a garden on a Sunday morning, and that I had almost missed it entirely. I found out my wife had been applying for jobs in another city for 6 months. She did not know I had been doing the same thing. My name is Stephen. I am 37 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington, and 10 months ago my wife and I discovered simultaneously that we had each been applying for jobs in the same city, for approximately the same 6-month period without telling each other. The city was Portland. Neither of us had mentioned Portland to the other. Neither of us had said we were unhappy in Seattle. Neither of us had raised the idea of moving. We had been living parallel secret job searches in the same house for 6 months, and had found out about each other's when we both received interview requests from different companies in Portland on the same Tuesday morning, and had, independently, mentioned Portland at breakfast in ways that produced a silence that lasted long enough to require explanation. My wife's name is Elena. We had been married for 7 years and had lived in Seattle for 5 of those years and had, without discussion, both apparently arrived at the same conclusion about Seattle at approximately the same time, and had acted on that conclusion in the specific way of people who do not know how to raise a significant life change with their partner, so they quietly begin preparing for it alone. We sat at the breakfast table on that Tuesday morning, and we laughed for approximately 3 minutes at the specific absurdity of what we had just discovered. Then we had the conversation we had both been avoiding for 6 months. The conversation about Seattle, and what was missing from it, and what we both wanted that we had not been finding, and what Portland represented in both of our imaginings. The conversation lasted 4 hours. It was the most honest conversation about our shared life we had had in 2 years of marriage. We had both been circling the same dissatisfaction separately and secretly, and had not trusted the other to receive the conversation, and had been wrong about what the other would receive. We both accepted the Portland interviews. We both received offers. We moved to Portland 3 months ago. Our apartment here has a view of the West Hills and a coffee shop on the corner that we have been to every morning since we arrived, and that has become in 4 months the kind of place that a regular morning becomes when you are in the right city. Elena and I have talked about the 6 months of parallel secret job searches many times since. We have talked about what it meant that we had both been hiding the same thing from each other, and what that said about our communication, and what we needed to build differently in Portland than we had built in Seattle. Our therapist, We started couples therapy in Portland, a good decision. Says what we did was not deceptive and of emotional avoidance that had been serving us both, and that addressing the avoidance was the work. We are addressing it. The view of the West Hills is very good while we do. Update 3 months later. Elena got a promotion last month at her new job. We celebrated at the coffee shop on the corner, because the coffee shop on the corner has become our place in the way that places become yours when you have been going to them every morning for 7 months. She told me about the promotion over the same table we had been sitting at for 7 months, and I thought about the Tuesday morning in Seattle, when we had both said Portland at breakfast, and about what had been set in motion by that specific accidental simultaneous disclosure, and about where we had arrived from there. And I thought that some of the best things happen because two people are bad at the same conversation, and find out at the right moment. My husband's twin brother showed up at our door 15 years after my husband said he had no siblings. My name is Rachel. I am 41 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 18 months ago a man knocked on my door on a Saturday afternoon who had my husband's face and my husband's voice and my husband's specific way of standing, and who introduced himself as my husband's twin brother. My husband's name is David. We had been married for 12 years. David had told me when we were dating that he was an only child. He had maintained this for 12 years. He had not maintained it because the twin brother did not exist. He had maintained it because the twin brother had existed in a way that David had spent 15 years trying to not think about. His twin brother's name is Daniel. He is 42 years old, same as David, same face, same voice, same way of standing in a doorway. He had tracked David down through a combination of public records and persistent searching, because he had decided after 15 years that the distance between them had been long enough, and that he wanted to try. He had not called ahead. He had knocked on the door on a Saturday afternoon. I had answered. David was in the next room and heard me say hello to someone and came to the doorway, and went completely still. I stood between my husband and a man with my husband's face, and I understood that something significant was happening, and that I was not yet in possession of the information I needed to understand what. I made coffee. I am not entirely sure why making coffee was my response to this situation, but it was, and I think it was the right one because it gave all three of us something to do while David and Daniel looked at each other across a kitchen table for the first time in 15 years. The conversation took 4 hours. I was present for the first hour, and then I left them alone because the conversation required privacy that I was not part of. What I know is the outline that David told me afterward. He and Daniel had been close as children, and had been separated by circumstances in their late 20s that David described as a serious falling out involving a decision David had made that Daniel had not been able to accept, and that had ended their contact. David had told people he was an only child because it had been easier than explaining a twin brother he did not speak to. He had told me because he had not wanted to explain, and because by the time explaining had become possible the lie had been in place long enough that correcting it felt impossible. David and Daniel are in contact now. Not repaired. 15 years is not repaired in an afternoon, but in contact and working towards something. I am adjusting to the existence of a brother-in-law I did not know I had for 12 years who has my husband's face, and who brings a specific energy into our home that is familiar in ways I cannot account for given that I had never met him before a Saturday afternoon 18 months ago. David apologized to me for the 12 years. He said it properly and completely, and I received it properly, and we are in couples therapy working on what it meant that he had found it easier to erase a twin than to explain a complicated history. Our therapist says the erasing says something specific about David, and the something specific is what we are working on. I think she is right. Daniel came for dinner last month. He and David sat across from each other at my kitchen table, and they talked in the specific shorthand of people who grew up together, and then stopped and are finding out what is still there. I sat at the end of the table, and I watched my husband's face on two people, and I thought about Saturday afternoons and unexpected doors, and the specific life that arrives when someone who was erased comes back. Update: 4 months later. David and Daniel went to visit a place from their childhood last month. Somewhere significant, the details of which David told me were private between them for now, and which I respected. David came home and he was quieter than usual, and I did not ask, and he said thank you for not asking, and I said you can tell me when you are ready, and he said he knew and that knowing was part of why he had been able to go. We had dinner, and he told me one thing about the visit. A small specific thing. A place they had gone as children that had been converted into something else, and that had been both lost and ordinary, and that they had stood in front of together, and had understood together in a way that only people who shared the original could understand. I told him I was glad he had gone. He said he was too. Daniel texted me the following morning, directly, not through David, and said thank you for the dinners and for making room. I said he was welcome, and that making room was easier than I had expected. He said he thought that was because David had made room first by finally telling the truth. I thought